right, let's get started with our slab first. So it was stored on newspaper. I'm going to take it out of my bin, remove the newspaper, and throw that away. If you haven't already, you need to scree the slab, which is taking your plastic credit card or the flat side of your rib and laying it on the surface at about a 45-degree angle, pressing down and gliding it across the surface, and this lays all of the clay particles down in the same direction. I'm going to do this on both sides. It also kind of compresses the surface and makes a nicer surface for us to work on and apply your underglaze later. It's an important step. Cleaning it off in between passes. That is all for that step. Next, we're going to cut out the shape of our mug, making sure that we leave enough room on our slab. So you're going to have to move the tracer around in order to find a space where you can cut the mug out. Make sure that you are avoiding any creases in your slab or major dents or air bubbles or anything like that that you've seen. And then you also want to make sure that you have enough space to do the bottom of the mug, which ends up being, if you're not sure, roughly the size of the sponge that's in your kit, and then also a long rectangle for your handle. Okay. From there, I'm going to cut this out using the triangle blade on my dentist tool here. I'm going to start at one corner, and I'm going to run my finger along the edge of this tracer as I cut to make sure that the tracer doesn't fold up, which they have a tendency to do when they get start to get damp from the clay. Clean my tool off. I'm going to start at the next corner. You don't want to turn a corner with your knife. You want to stop and reposition the knife. And I'm making sure that I'm keeping my knife straight up and down. That's how you get a really sharp edge on your slab. What you don't want to do is cut like this. I know it seems like it's easier to see what you're doing, but you're going to get an angle on the edge of this slab that we don't want, that we're going to have to clean up later if you end up with that. So try to keep that knife straight up and down. All right, I'm going to take off these extra pieces, small pieces that I'm not going to use. All right, and clump them up, and then I'm going to move this extra slab piece that I will need for later back into my bin while I work. All right, I'm done with this tracer for now. I'm going to take my sponge, wet it and wring it out, and we're going to just smooth and round out these edges before we move on. So just taking the end of the sponge and doing a couple passes on each edge, just on the corner. I'm not going over the whole surface. I've screed the surface of the clay, so I know that is nice and smooth and compressed. I don't want to disrupt that. So I'm just doing the edges of that slab, and then I'm going to really carefully lift this up. So I'm going to kind of peel it off the mat, kind of by lifting the mat up and bending it so that I don't mess up this edge on the slab, and then I'm going to very carefully get up and lift it over. What can happen if you're not careful when you're flipping this piece of clay back and forth, which I don't really want to do too many times, is it can stretch in certain areas, and then when you go to assemble the mug into your mug shape, it'll be kind of off kilter or sitting kind of to the side, and it's because part of the shape got stretched and now isn't correct. So you want to be really careful as you're moving it back and forth. All right, so now we're going to actually start, we're going to miter these two short edges and then wrap this guy up. To miter these edges, mitering just means we're going to cut an angle on these edges so that they're not flat, and that allows us to get a completely seamless seam here where we join the two ends of this shape together, this slab of clay. So what we're going to do is use the edge of your tracer, like so, and you're going to measure in about 1/4 of an inch, which is like the thickness, the width of your pinky fingernail. It's about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to take my pencil or my pencil tool, and I'm going to draw a guideline here. All right. And now we're going to use the edge of the table here to cut this at an angle. There are tools that do this, but they are expensive, and it can be done for 0, the edge of the table. We're going to learn it that way. All right, so I'm going to very carefully move my slab to the edge of the table, and I'm going to line it right up on the edge of the table. You can also slide your mat over so you don't have to lift it up again. Okay, and then I know it's a little difficult to see from this distance, but I'll hold it up at the end. You take your triangle end of your knife, and I'm going to lay it on the edge of the table, on the corner of the table. So I'm using that to guide me so I can slide back and forth. So I'm going to start there. Start at a 45-degree angle, so not straight up and down, angled towards you, angled in. And I'm going to start here, and what I want is for the tip of the knife to poke through the slab right along that guideline that I drew. All right? So what that looks like a little bit closer is, let's see if I can get it up here. So this is the edge of my table, like so. Bring us a little closer. So my knife is on the edge of the table at the 45-degree angle. I'm going to come right up to my slab and line up the knife so that the tip is right along that line. And I'm going to slide towards myself, making sure that the tip of the knife follows that guideline and that I don't lift the knife off the edge of the table. And I slide it all the way to myself. See how my thumb is at the bottom of my slab here? So I run my knife all the way here, and that'll help not stretch out the bottom of this slab or rip a chunk off the bottom. Okay, so what you'll cut off is going to be this triangular strip, and your slab will be cut on an angle like that. Can you see that? There we go. So cut at an angle instead of straight up and down. All right, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, but here's the key. I need to flip this over and then cut that miter cut on the other side. If you miter one side and spin it around, you won't get the angles won't be facing the right direction. So it's miter and flip. I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to use the edge of my tracer to measure in 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to draw my guideline with my pencil, which is important because you cannot cut and draw at the same time ever. You do one task in clay at a time. I'm going to angle my knife on the edge of the table, which for right now is the edge of this box. I'm going to slide it, making sure that the tip is following that guideline all the way through, and then peel that piece off. Add these extra bits to my pile of clay, and now we'll assemble this. Again, being very careful when you keep lifting it up that you are not missshaping it and stretching it out. So to assemble this, we're going to, the smaller side goes down, and I'm going to start, I'm just going to stand it up, and I'm going to work my way around from one end with my thumb on the inside, starting to create this curve. I'm not just taking it and folding it in half, because you will not get a circle. All right, the clay has all those little flat platelets, all right, and so you're trying to get them all bent in the right direction. So I'm working my way around a little at a time, my thumb's on the inside, and I'm kind of curving this. Pay special attention to this end piece. They have a tendency to stay very straight and end up getting a teardrop shape on your mug instead of a circle. And you're going to keep doing this until these mitered edges meet. So it's a slow process, okay? I'm going to flip this over really carefully and do the same thing on the bottom. I'm working up and down like this. I'm not working on my mug this way, where then I have to deal with gravity constantly trying to turn it into an oval instead of a circle. I want a circle. All right, so I've walked this all the way around, and I'm almost all the way closed with that seam. So we're going to score and then push it the rest of the way together. So I'm going to take my serrated rib, all right, and I'm going to score both of these seams like I always do. If you ever find yourself asking the question, do I need to score? The answer is always yes in every scenario, okay? And you're going to score in an X pattern. So this is a seam that's going to have a lot of pressure on it, and so it is incredibly important that it's attached correctly and well, or it'll have a tendency to pop apart, even as it dries. But in the past, we've seen some that make it into the kiln, but then because of the shrinkage that happens when the kiln fires, when it heats up, the seams will pop apart. Glaze will not fill it. So a mug that comes out of the bisque kiln with a crack is not functional, all right, and will not be, which poses a problem because we were making a functional project, all right. I cannot give you something that you may take home and drink milk out of, and that milk will seep down into the cracks and be really, really germy and terrible, all right. So I've scored this in an X pattern, so up close you can see this is really rough. All right, if you basically think you've done enough scoring, do some more. There should be crusties, all right? The entire surface should be scored. Remember, we want this Velcro action to be happening, okay? Velcro is not smooth. All right, I'm gonna take my slip, and I'm gonna apply slip to one side of this seam, and I'm kind of patting it on versus painting it on because I don't want to smooth out the scoring that I just did. And now we're gonna push these seams together. Think of that Velcro action again. So I'm going to start at the top and use my thumbs to press these together, and I'm going to work about halfway down, and then I'm going to flip it over. So I'm going to start at the very top here. I'm going to press the two seams together and give them a little bit of a wiggle. I'm trying not to press and make fingerprints, but this step is so important. You do need to apply pressure and make sure that they are actually attached. You'll see the slip will squish out. All right, that's normal. And you can see that those mitered corners mitered edges, line up perfectly, and there you get an overlap. The other reason why we miter is because it actually allows for more surface area to be scored and slipped together than if I just did a flat edge to a flat edge. The other thing is flat edge to flat edge. In the past, it'll give you a gap, and then you have to go back and fill the gap. So, or a seam rather. So that is why we do it this way. So I'm working my thumbs all the way up here along the edge, making sure that this seam closes. And remember, I'm working with the cup standing up, all right, not laying down, because then you're dealing with gravity, okay? So the seam should look like this. So I've got a little bit of slip squishing out, all right, which is good, but it's all nice and lined up at the top. It's lined up at the bottom. On the inside, you'll notice there's a little bit of a rough spot. That's all right. So now we're going to do the finishing on this seam. You're going to take your modeling tool that has the thumb end on it. Looks like that. This is going to be similar to what we did for attaching or blending together your coils on your bell. So I'm going to start here on the outside, and then I'm going to take this thumb tool, and what I want to do is blend that seam together. So I'm blending from the side, that sticks up. Okay, so this was the end of the slab that overlapped on top of this side. So I'm blending from that direction across, and your slip will mush out, and that's good. And I'm going to go all the way up this seam. So what you're trying to do is you're compressing the seam together, which is making it strong. You're making sure that every little bit gets pushed down. There's no air bubbles in there. And we're also smoothing So I kind of work in an X again, so I go one direction and then I go opposite direction. Just really make sure that's compressed. All right, and the slip's gonna be kind of smushed around. It's overall more flat, but certainly not certainly not finished. Then we're gonna come back to this credit card again, and we're gonna use this to smooth the surface and get it nice and round. You can see that it's a little pointy there at that seam, and that's what tends to happen. So with the credit card, if you press your thumb in between, so kind of put your fingers on, separate your fingers on the back side and press your thumb in between there, you get a curved shape, which can mimic the curve on the outside of the mug. And so I slide that up the side of the mug, clean it off, and I do that a couple times, and that continues to compress the clay, but also returns that seam to that nice round shape. So I make sure when you're doing this that you really want to curve the card, otherwise you're going to flatten this side of the mug, which we don't want. I like to just run my finger over the seam at the end. It should look like that, so it should be basically seamless. You should be able to tell where that seam was. All right, and I do the same thing on the bottom here, smooth this out. Okay. And then we're going to compress the seam on the inside. So I'm going to hold the cup in my hand with the seam into my palm because I'm going to push on this inside seam, and I need to make sure that my hand is there to support that. So I'm going to start in the middle. Let's see if I can get the light on there. Okay, start in the middle, and I'm going to work along the seam instead of across and just compress that seam the rest of the way down. Make sure there's no crusties on your tool because they'll mark up the inside of the cup. So I'm not really moving too much clay from one side to another as much as I'm compressing that down. If you have a big gap, you might need to go across, but the rounded tool does a good job of kind of doing that without making like big gouges in there. And then I'm going to go to the other end, and I'm going to work from the middle out this way. I find that that's easier to do than to start from the larger opening and do the entire thing, because you're kind of using the end of your tool way out far, and it's a little bit harder to control. Do this all the way to the bottom. All right. So then you would see me just tapping the mug on the table. So when you're working on it, it gets a little, sometimes they can get off center or kind of lean in one direction. And so what you can do is kind of tap it on the table gently to kind of get it straight up and down again. All right, and now we're going to put the bottom on, cut the bottom and put that on, and then wrap it up with the handle. So I'm going to grab that extra piece of slab from my kit, my bin. And I'm going to use this side to create a handle, so I'm going to want to put the bottom, cut the bottom out of my mug from this corner over here. All right, so I'm going to take my mug, and the small side is the bottom. So the first thing I want to do, though, is take another minute and make sure that this is as round here as I possibly can get it. Because I'm going to use this to trace the actual bottom. And so what I've seen sometimes is people don't stop and do that step, and the bottom is actually more triangular or more square, which we don't want. and then it's going to be a lot harder to reshape later. So I'm going to sit this down on my slab, all right, and then I'm going to trace around it with my pencil first. Remember, you do one step at a time, one task at a time. If I'm cutting something out, I want to make sure that I'm drawing the line out first, and then I'm cutting. Your brain finds it hard to draw things and cut things at the same time. You just end up having to do it over again. All right, I'm going to gently peel that mug off and set it to the side, and I'm going to cut this piece out using the triangle end of my dentist tool. I'm holding that tool straight up and down as I cut, slow and steady. This one's really important that the knife is straight up and down, because otherwise you'll get a situation like this, and then when we go to attach it to the bottom of your mug, you've got a bit of an issue there that we have to clean up. So I'm trying to save you some time and steps later. Peel that off. I'm going to stick those pieces to my extra hunk of clay. And then, just like we did with the mug body itself, I'm going to sponge that edge just to get rid of all those crusties and everything, and then we'll attach this to the bottom. So flip this guy over. Basically, every time you pick it up, it gets a little bit less circular, so you want to keep checking on it to make sure it's staying circular. I'm going to score this really, really well here. Same thing in an X pattern. And then on this slab, you're going to score the border outside, basically 1/4 inch of this slab. You don't want to, slab circle, you don't want to score the entire thing, because this will be on the inside of the mug, and then you're going to have to smooth that out later, because that is an area for germs, bacteria to live, which we do not want. I'm sure all of you will be using these. I am drinking my coffee this morning out of a slab mug that a student made. All right, I'm gonna paint my slip-on. Doesn't matter if you put it on the bottom of the mug or on the bottom here. Okay, and then line this up. Whoop. Line it up first. Get it adjusted before I push it down. Okay, and you're going to want to use the flat part of your hand. We don't use our fingertips because it's going to make a mark, because I really do need to press against this. And so what I'm going to do instead is use this flat part of my hand here. I'm going to turn this to the side so you can see what I'm doing. All right, and I'm going to press and give it the slightest bit of a wiggle, and I'm going to work my way around. Press and wiggle, and you can see that the slip is squishing out, which tells me that all of those little score marks are filling in with slip, which I want them to do, okay? Which makes sure that I don't have any air bubbles in there, and that I'm getting a good bond on those two pieces of clay. And work my way around. So I use that flat part of my hand so that I'm not making marks all in there. All right, the seam is gonna look a little rough. That's normal. All right, and now we're going to take care of that seam. So if you remember when we did pinch pots, my favorite step, my favorite thing to do on a project is the smoothing step, which we start with scratching first. So we're going to do the same thing on this seam. So I'm going to start in one section. I'm not going to do it all the way around first. I like to do a little section at a time. All right, and I'm going to scratch in an X pattern, and I'm scratching from the bottom of the mug, so the slab that I just attached on there, cleaning my tool off each time, towards the mug. And I'm only doing the seam seam. I'm not scratching down the whole surface of the mug. We used a slab for this and we compressed it so the surface of the mug is really nice. I don't want to change that. Just want to focus my attention on this seam here. Okay, so you're going to score that up really well. And what the rib does is it'll chew off, do it in this area here where it's a good example. So you see how I have all this extra overhang on my, from the base, and that's probably because I measured using my actual mug, but then probably didn't line it up exactly right. That's probably supposed to go on the other side. So by doing this scratching step first, it'll chew down or kind of chew off the clay, the areas that are too high or that overhang, and kind of press it into the lower areas. All right, so I've scratched that up good. I'm try not to touch the bottom. So I'm not doing the whole corner. I'm really staying on that side. And then I'm going to take my plastic credit card again. And I'm going to hold this parallel with the side of the mug. And I'm going to drag it across just like when we smooth the surface of the pinch pots. So that's just one pass there, and you can see how much better it looks. So I'm going to smooth the side, butt up. Clean off my tool, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. Smooth the bottom, clean off my tool. And you alternate back and forth, and by alternating, you don't lose the crisp slab corners. So it does all the work for you and kind of maintains that sharp edge, because we don't want the bottom of the mug to be suddenly lumpy and round. All right, so you can see you have a sharp bottom that meets the side of the mug. Ideally, you want your mug to continue this line straight down till it hits the table. So you don't want it to flare out or flare in. You want it to be a straight line down the side of the mug till it hits the table. And then the last thing I'm going to do is just really, really carefully with my sponge smooth over that seam again and make sure I don't have any little stray scoring marks until it looks completely seamless. If you notice that there's like a little tiny kind of a line there, a gap between the two of them, just do the scoring step again and it will disappear. Score and smooth again. I'll work my way around here, finish this step, and then we're going to put careful when you're doing this step as well. I just noticed I was doing it a little bit. I'm holding kind of in the middle of the mug, and if you do that a lot, it's going to start to change the shape of your mug, and it's going to start to kind of curve this way. So you're better off holding it from the top, just because if you don't hold it at all, it's going to flip over. But you're better off securing it from the top. Cleaning that tool off each time on my mat. adjust that corner, and then just make sure I smooth out any string marks. That is the cup, and then to make the mug, we're going to add a handle to it. Before we do that, we need to take a look on the inside of the mug. It's going to be a little difficult to see. Let me adjust my lighting here for a second. Okay, so on the inside of the mug here, all right, you can see this, the slip is squished out. That seam is really important. You can compress that seam. So I think the easiest thing I've found so far as tools, is to take your trusty blue paintbrush, which has a rounded end on it, all right, and go down here at the bottom and just slide your trusty paintbrush end around in that seam. I'm not trying to scrape off any clay. I'm just trying to press those two edges together. So it's gonna look like, let's see here, like that there on the left side, there, instead of here. All right, so you want the two to be blended together. If you did a really good job pushing these two things together and don't have a lot of scoring marks, which I'm doing pretty good here, you should be able to take your wet paintbrush, so just take the other end of that and paint over it a couple times, and that should seal any seams. If you do that and it's not quite enough, you still see a little gap, you'll see a little dark area, the shadow, then do the handle end. And then just smooth all that out in there. Remember, a glaze is not gonna fill a crack, it's gonna make it worse, because they also shrink the clay during the glaze firing. Clay shrinks additionally, so it's gonna kind of really honestly makes any kind of blemish like that worse. All right, and then our handles. So you've got some options for handles. Standard is the kind of half heart or question mark handle, all right, that I usually do, okay, which is made from just a long rectangle of clay shape that you shape. You've got a kind of a D-shaped handle, also an option. I'll show you in a second. That looks like this. Like that. These are a little trickier though, because that seam is where you score and attach this handle to the mug. It's very small. So when you do a handle like this, you need to make sure that you're putting a support coil in here and here when you attach the handle to the mug, which I will show you in a second. When you do the question mark shape, see how this points down, okay, like half a heart, so this joins the mug pointing down, giving you a larger surface area, like you can see here, larger surface area to score and slip on, so that I don't need the coil step necessarily. I usually put a coil in this seam up here because I don't like the gap. All right, so I just jam a coil, which you'll see me do in a second. So this shape handle requires a coil here and a coil here onto the mug. The other option that you could consider, and people have asked, can I do a handle that's a different shape or a sculptural handle, so something that goes with your theme? You can absolutely build a component and attach that to the side as the handle. You could also take your slab and cut the slab into an interesting shape that goes with your theme. So if you remember, my theme is kind of a wooded forest at night. And I thought maybe a fir tree might be kind of cool with some texture on it, so I cut that out to see what I thought of that. And then it would attach like this on the side. You want to make sure though that you do have somewhere to put your hand, to put your fingers to grip it, because if these will all be glazed, including the handle. And if you have, if your hand is a little bit damp, handles are really hard to grip actually. So that's really honestly why I like this shaped handle better, because I feel like the D-shaped handle, when I pick this up, if my hand is wet at all, the mug slides like this. And that's not an effective way to keep the liquid inside the mug. So that, my reason for choosing these is usually just a function reason. All right. So for either of the two handles, the half heart or the D-shaped handle, you're going to need a long rectangle. So you can use the edge of a paper to create that long line, or a ruler if you have it. Just anything with a straight edge. Don't freehand it, all right? So I'm going to draw out my handle here. You want it to be at least a 1/2 inch wide, but under 1 inch. So this is my ruler here. So that's a 1/2 inch there. And this is 1 inch. So 1 inch handle is pretty wide to grip. So that would be here. All right, it's just a little bit too much to get your hand around. So I like to do like 3/4. That's what this is. But it's a preference. I'm going to draw 2 parallel lines. If you are not good at eyeballing it, the trick to measuring is I draw my first line and I measure, make a mark, and then I measure at the other end and make a mark, and then connect those 2 dots. And that will make sure that it's even and parallel. All right, so I'm going to cut this out just like I have. Give a ruler. Use that to cut, and I'll speed up everything. If not, just go very slowly. Make sure your knife is straight up and down. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this piece. Got to hold on to this piece. All right, and the first thing I'm going to do is, same thing I've done for the mug body and the base, is stop and do the edges of this with my sponge. And that is going to knock down any sharp edges and just kind of give it a much more finished look. Okay, I'm going to cut these ends off flat. Okay. So if I were doing the D-shaped handle, I would go ahead from there and shape this, and then cut off any extra clay. So you're going to have to kind of look and make sure that the handle isn't too large. I think that's a little large. So I would want to cut some of this down to get the right dimensions, proportion for my mug, so that it was not too large of a handle. Okay? And if I'm doing the heart-shaped half-heart version, I like to cut another piece here. Pinch the end of the slab a little bit thinner, and then it makes a really nice transition into the mug. All right, so this guy I would just attach like this and then add a coil, which I'm going to show you in a second. But for the heart-shaped one, what I do is just a little bit here. Pinch gently. Remember when you pinch, you want to use the flat, doughy part of your hand, not your fingernail. Okay. But I pinch the end of this slab thinner, nice and uniform, so it kind of tapers, okay, to narrower. Now, I'm going to turn this into my half heart shape. That tapered bit points down, and then that gives me that nice large area to score and attach to my mug. So I'm going to actually end up scoring this whole section there, all in here, and that gives me a nice large area of contact against the mug. That whole section here, all of this. Hang on. Yeah, that whole section there. And then I could cut it to size and kind of shape it how I like it. Some people like it really round and curvy. Some people like it's a little thinner, kind of more narrow. And then the other thing you can do is the bottom of this doesn't have to stay square like mine. I did do some carving detail there, some sgraffito detail, that you could cut this round. You could cut it to a triangle. You can really do a lot of different things. Some people also taper this end so that it just basically blends right into the mug. So you can have a lot of different options with the same handle. All right, so I'm gonna put that handle on a different mug. I'm gonna actually attach this handle so you can see how I do the quill. So we're gonna put the handle right where your seam is, so it helps camouflage the seam. Actually, so the first thing I'm gonna do is line up where I want this handle to be, and then really carefully mark where I'm gonna score, so that I'm really not doing, I don't have a lot of scoring to clean up and I can get it in the right spot. And then I'm going to pay really, really close attention to getting good scoring here. When you're doing small things, if you use the round end of your rib, you can kind of control your marks better than using the long flat side. All right, and then I'm gonna grab this and I'm gonna carefully score. I'm trying not to, the thing with the handles is to try not to flex them flat and curved a bunch of times, because that's gonna cause the clay to crack. So once I curve it, I really try and keep it in that shape. You can work on the tables a lot easier. It's hard, so for a demo, I have to kind of hover under the camera. All right, I'm gonna score the handle in both areas, and then I'm gonna attach this. And the one thing to keep in mind is to make sure that you're attaching the handle evenly this way. It's really easy to attach the top, which I kind of did a little bit, too far right or left from the bottom, and so then the handle kind of is at an angle like this. So you want to really make sure that the top's attached right above the bottom. I'm going to stand this up, and I'm going to once again go in here and wiggle. So I'm going to kind of hold snugly on the handle and then on the inside of the mug and wiggle back and forth, and you should really feel it grip. Same thing down here. And if it's slipping all over the place, it's best to just slip the handle off, score it better, and then do the same thing again. I'm going to make sure that's lined up. Need this to come over a little bit. All right, and then to reinforce these seams, so I'm going to do this on the top and the bottom, I'm going to put a little coil in there and blend it in. So I'm going to take a little bit of my extra clay, which should still be pretty soft from your slab, and I'm going to roll a really tiny coil. All right, like that. And then you've got some slip squishing out of there already. So I'm going to use that to my advantage. So all I'm going to do is take this, I use the hook end of the dentist tool. And I press that clay into the seam and then blend it out. So I kind of blend one side to the handle and one side to the mug. And You'll figure out which tools you like best. Some people like the hook end of the dentist tool. Some people prefer, depending on also how large or small the area you're working with is. Some people prefer the wood modeling tool. People also use the pencil tool. So you want this to be a really nice blend between the mug and the handle. I don't do it on the sides. I don't do it on the sides of the handle. I just use the flat side of my wooden modeling tool and just clean up the slip that's squishing out there. Right. People have a tendency to think they should take this handle and smear it onto the mug, and you don't want to do that because it's really hard to control that. And so they end up spreading out like on the sides of the mug, and it doesn't give you a nice clean edge. I'm going to do another coil down here, on the inside of this handle, in here. Okay. Really tiny coils. You don't want them to be kind of mushing out all over the side of the mug. You want to just keep them really, really tight in that space. But that's going to provide additional support in that seam, since we know that that's a finicky area. We know that that is really susceptible to cracking, and so it provides a little bit of reinforcement there. Just lay that coil in. Let's see. There. Lay that coil in, and then I'm just pressing it in with the dentist tool, because it's nice and small and fits in the area. And then I kind of switch over to my modeling tool to do the blending. So it should look like there is no coil there. It should be seamless. And then, last step for your handle joints is to brush over them with your wet paintbrush, your little blue brush. Smooth everything out. If you got any little crusties or marks on your handles, I would hit that with a sponge. Be cautious of how much water you're putting on this at any time. I'm really selective about when I sponge things, because if you do it too frequently, you're going to take the slip, so take that nice smooth clay off the surface, and what you're going to start to see happen is you're going to get these little grainy bits of sand. You're going to start to see sand, or what looks like sand, it's grog, on the surface of your clay. And what that is the grog in the clay. You've wiped off the smooth layer of slip of clay on the surface, and you're revealing kind of the inside of the clay. And I can't fix that. I can't put it back. And you're going to be able to see it when you put your underglaze on. So I don't want to keep repeatedly sponging the surface of this. All right, seams are important for this. Anything that is sharp once it's glazed, or anything that is pointy or sharp, will be worse when it is glazed, and can be actually really sharp and hurt someone. So we want to make sure that all of our seams and our edges and everything are nice and finished. Okay, I would do the exact same thing if I was doing the question mark handle shape. Both seams point down, and I score and I slip them on, and then I go back and I check all my seams. These do not require that coil step. All right, and then I will sign the bottom of the mug and put it in in the gallon bag that you have in your bin and wait until we are ready to apply the underglaze to it next week. All right?